Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Delta Airlines Flight 2998, bound for Atlanta, Georgia, with continued service to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. All carry-on items should now be stowed securely either in an overhead bin. This happened around 10 years ago when I was about 7 years old. My family always traveled a lot, and even though I was only 7, I had already been on more flights than I could count. And because of that, I knew our local airport, almost like the back of my hand. This time we showed up to our gate, nearly 2 hours early. I remember waiting for maybe an hour when I suddenly had to use the bathroom. I told my parents, and because they knew I understood the airport layout at least enough to find the bathroom, they let me go alone. And so I started my 5-minute walk to the main bathrooms, which were actually the only ones I really knew. It was around 3 a.m. and I get that is when they cleaned them because the whole area was roped off and closed. I was 7 and not great at making smart choices, so instead of going back, I wandered around looking for another bathroom in parts of the airport I had never seen before. This eventually led me to a quiet hallway sort of separated from the rest of the airport. I thought I saw a bathroom sign near the end of it, so I kept walking. But when I was halfway down, I saw a head slowly peek around a corner. It was a man. I froze in place. Hey kid, come over here. Without thinking, I walked toward him. Honestly, I just assumed he worked there and would show me another restroom, but no, he told me he was lost and needed me to follow him so I could help him find the right gate for his plane and back. Then I not only believed him, but felt excited to help an adult since I knew the airport pretty well, and it made me feel important. I said I would help, but I wanted to tell my parents real quick, not even to be careful. I just wanted to tell them because I was excited. I told the guy I'd be right back, but when I turned around to go, he suddenly yelled at me saying we did not have time and his plane was about to leave. I still told him I would be fast and kept walking. And after stepping out of the hallway, I looked back and saw the man running away down the stairs that led to the exits. I thought it was strange, but said nothing to my parents. And after finally finding a bathroom, I forgot about it completely. Fast forward to a couple years ago, I was talking with some coworkers about weird childhood moments, and that memory hit me hard. Being older, it only took seconds to understand what almost happened to me, and it made my stomach drop realizing how much danger I never noticed as a kid. Thinking back, I should have told my parents, but I just hope he did not try it on another kid like me. I am a college student now, and with all my money going towards school, any extra cash helps. So mid-semester, I picked up a part-time job as a ramp agent at my local airport. Basically, I load and unload airplane baggage and every once in a while we transport dead bodies in cargo boxes, and this night happened to be one of those nights. On top of that, it was pouring rain with loud thunder and bright lightning. And of course, my manager assigned me to unload this plane. All throwing means is that I was the one who had to pull the cargo out of the storage bin. I was exhausted from classes earlier and just wanted to go home. Luckily, there was not much cargo. My coworker Dave pulled up the ramp and raised it so I could walk up the belt and climb into the storage bin. I crawled into the cramped space and sat as far from the white cardboard box with the dead body as I could. I was alone up there and moving as fast as the slow conveyor belt allowed, since the guys on the ground had to scan every package. I had been working for maybe 5 minutes when the lightning grew closer and louder. I put in my earbuds trying to ignore it when suddenly the loudest crash I had ever heard shook the entire plane. It was lightning hitting so close that I fell to the floor. I looked up on instinct and saw the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. At the far end of the dark storage bin, the lid of the cargo box flew off. The dead body sat straight up like something had yanked it upright. The force sent the lid spinning across the bin, and I froze for a second, then panicked at full speed, running down the ramp, while my coworkers screamed at me that the plane had just been hit by lightning. We went inside, and after I caught my breath, I explained to them what I had just seen in the storage bin of the plane, and I will never forget how fast the color drained from their faces, replaced with pure horror. After around 5 minutes of talking about what happened and hearing how scared I sounded, my manager finally said it was best if I just went home. During the whole drive, I was stuck in a strange frozen shock. I did not know what to think. I did not know if what I witnessed was real or something my mind imagined. But shortly after I got home, at least part of it was proven real when one of my co-workers texted me and explained that when he went back into the storage bin, the lid to the cargo box with the dead body was off, but the body itself was not sitting up. I looked online trying to find out if a lightning strike could send enough energy through a plane to make a dead body tense and sit upright for a few seconds, but I could not find anything at all. So to this day, I still have no idea if what I saw was caused by the lightning, a trick from my exhausted mind, or something else entirely. But either way, I quit my job at the airport the very next morning. I honestly could not see the money as worth it anymore. The fear I felt that night was more than any paycheck could fix. I live in Portland, Oregon, and because of my job, I often end up in completely different cities for a weekend, or sometimes even for weeks at a time. What I do is kind of like event managing, and it forces me to travel all over the country to be present at different places. The company pays for my flights, but no matter where I had to go, it always felt like they booked the cheapest flight possible. I get it, they want to save money, but this usually meant terrible flight experiences, and seeing some strange people would be an understatement, though honestly, I never cared much as long as I got to my destination safely, or at least that is what I used to think. I was at the Dallas airport, waiting for a flight back home to Oregon. It was a Sunday night, and I had worked all weekend, and of course I had to be in the office Monday morning. I was exhausted to the point where I could barely make it to my gate. Something I should probably mention is that my flight had two parts: first from Dallas to Sacramento, then from Sacramento to Portland. The first flight was not too full. I sat in the window seat, and only one other person was in my row, a middle-aged man who looked pretty normal except for his clothes, which were old and worn. But honestly, nobody dresses fancy for a flight. We made small talk for a few minutes, though I just wanted to lean against the wall and sleep. I pulled out my phone to watch something before closing my eyes when I noticed the guy turning and glancing over his shoulder at me. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he just wanted a look out the window, but less than a minute later, I heard him mumble something like, "Oh great, just ignore me." Then this kept happening, and I kept convincing myself I was imagining it. But then I noticed him scribbling hard on a page inside a leather book he held, and I found myself peeking, trying to see what he was doing. And that is when I realized the page was filled with tiny writing so small I could barely read any of it. I tried to make out what he wrote, and that is when I realized he was writing about me. My name was clearly on the page. I guessed I must have said my name during our earlier talking. I leaned forward trying to read more, but the words were too tiny and too far away, and it made my stomach twist. I was honestly disturbed, and there was no way I could fall asleep. Finally, we landed in Sacramento, and people started getting off the plane, but the guy next to me did not move at all. He made no effort to gather his things. Even when it was our row's turn to leave, he just sat there with his head down, forcing everyone behind us to squeeze past. I finally spoke up, telling him I had a connection flight to catch and that he needed to move, and still with his head down, almost whispering, he said, "I am gonna follow you. You are not leaving this airport alive." I gave a nervous laugh, thinking he was joking, but he sounded deadly serious. He stood up and let me out, but as soon as we left the plane, it became clear he meant what he said. My walk turned into a fast walk and then into a jog, and when I looked behind me, he sped up too. After around 5 minutes of this chase, I reached the gate for my next flight with him still just steps behind me. I went to the counter trying to stay calm, and I firmly told the employees I had no idea who the man beside me was. They laughed at first, thinking I was messing around, but when they saw the panic on my face, their smiles disappeared. They asked for our boarding passes, and I handed them mine, but the man handed them his too. The employee made a few calls, and after a moment told me to follow them. They quickly ushered me through the boarding door and shut it before he could come after me. I was being boarded 10 minutes before anyone else. Eventually, everyone else came on, and a woman behind me asked what had happened. I gave her a short version, and she said, "Yeah, the guy had a total meltdown the second you got on the plane. He was screaming and almost ripping his hair out. Police had to come take him away." This terrified me even more and made me think that he really did want to kill me. It is obvious the guy had serious mental problems, or at least I think so, because I have not heard anything more about the situation. But if that is the case, I just hope the guy gets the help he needs. The summer of 2007, when I was 10 years old, the family and I had a trip to Disney. and planned our flight was booked for midnight on a Tuesday. To save money, and my mom figured my sisters and I would sleep through the flight. My sisters were 8 and 5 at the time. The gatehouse was mostly empty as we waited for our flight. My mom went to the bathroom with my youngest sister, and a minute later my dad told me to wait there and watch my other sister while he went to grab a quick bite to eat at the cafe. A middle-aged woman suddenly came and sat next to us, putting her hand on my back and acting overly excited to see us. As she asked where our parents were, I told her they would be right back. Then a middle-aged man walked over too, acting just as cheerful and familiar with us as if he already knew us. The man said he had just run into my dad at the cafe, and then introduced himself and the woman as our dad's cousins. My sister and I looked at each other and quietly said hello. The man reached out his hand for my sister, while the woman reached out her hand for me, and they told us to follow them because they wanted us to meet their kids. My sister and I naively stood up, held their hands, and followed them. They led us out of the gatehouse, past the cafe, down the stairs, and toward the lobby. When I realized they were leading us toward the entrance of the airport and the parking lot, I finally asked, "Where are we going?" The woman looked at me through her thick glasses with a strange smile and said their kids were outside by the car. As we stepped into the dark parking lot, I looked at my sister and felt a heavy, uncomfortable feeling. I pulled my hand free from the woman and said we wanted to go back inside, while also pulling my sister's hand out of the man's grip. I noticed the two of them look at each other, and their cheerful smiles disappeared. The man quickly turned and wrapped his arms around me as the woman grabbed my sister. They began literally carrying us closer to the cars as we screamed, and in the distance we heard shouting from two men who turned out to be airport security. The pair instantly dropped us and ran faster than I had ever seen anyone run, disappearing into the dark parking lot. One security guard chased after them while the other spoke with us and brought us back inside to our parents and sister. It had only been minutes, and my mom was already sobbing like a baby. Since I was so young, the whole memory feels weird and uncomfortable to think about, and it is strange that I didn't notice any red flags. When they never told us their names, it was minutes before boarding my flight to North Carolina for a job interview the next day. It was a stormy February night, everyone bundled up and keeping to themselves. I was sitting in the terminal waiting for my flight to be called. It wasn't going to be a busy flight because there weren't many people there. Someone sat down 2 seats from me, which wasn't too weird but annoying considering most seats were empty. It became disturbing when I glanced at him and saw him staring at me. I looked away, pretending not to notice, but I could feel his eyes on me. Then he leaned close to my ear and whispered that the 2 men sitting across from me were going on the same plane and were planning to kidnap me once we landed in North Carolina. I didn't know what to say except what the heavy man then stood up and walked away. At the same moment, my flight was called, and I nervously boarded, watching the 2 men. They sat ahead of me, and as I passed them, they stared me down, and I started to wonder if that man's warning was real. A few hours later, we arrived in NC, and while leaving the airport, I looked around trying to spot them outside in the dark, cold parking lot. I saw them. The 2 men were peeking their heads at me from behind a red minivan, and when they noticed me looking in their direction, they ducked behind it. I quickly walked back inside the airport, waited half an hour, called for a taxi, waited for it outside, then rode to my hotel. So many questions. I don't know who that man was who warned me. I don't know how he knew about those men, and I have no idea what they planned to do to me, if they were really trying to kidnap me. So this happened a few months ago. I'm 26. I was at JFK Airport in New York with 5 friends, all of us about to fly to Florida, spend the week in a beach house. We had a few minutes to kill before boarding, and suddenly, I really had to use the bathroom. I was confused to see a line out the door for it. I noticed a janitor walking by and asked if there was another bathroom with fewer people. She paused and said she shouldn't really tell anyone, but there was another bathroom past a door. She pointed at down a narrow flight of stairs and to the left. I thanked her for being so nice and followed her directions, and sure enough, behind that door that nobody would normally open was a small stairway leading down to a poorly lit, skinny hallway. It was so narrow that if 2 people were to walk by each other, one person would have to press up against the wall just to make room. I found the bathroom right away and the door felt strangely heavy and hard to push open. Also, the lights inside were already on, and the whole place looked filthy, like nobody ever came in here to clean. Now, this is kind of embarrassing to say, but when I use a bathroom in public, I always try to make sure nobody is around to hear anything. So, after checking the stall to make sure it was empty, I stepped back into the hallway for a second to look down both directions. To the left, there was someone standing at the far end of the hall in a dark section with no lights. It was a disturbing sight, and all I could do was quickly pull my head back into the bathroom and pretend we never saw each other. I went into the stall and stood there biting my fingers for a minute, dreading the idea of that door opening. And of course it did. I saw the man's black shoes under the stall door as he walked into the next stall. He shut the door, and then there was silence, no sound of him unzipping or sitting down, nothing. I realized I did not really have to go anymore and reached for the lock on the stall door. That was when I looked up and saw the man's head leaning over the top of the stall, staring straight at me. I nearly had a heart attack as my screams echoed around the tiny bathroom. I ran back up those awful steps and out the door, and then casually walked back over to my friends. I was breathing heavily, but nobody seemed to notice. I did not tell anyone because it felt embarrassing, and I did not want my friends making fun of me. I know it seems stupid now. We went on to have our Florida vacation, and everything was fine, but every night that week, the thought of that creepy man haunted me. My wife recently took a trip to California with some of her girlfriends. I drove her to the airport, and I was the one who picked her up too. I waited in the lobby for a while since her flight was running late by about 15 minutes. I felt relieved when I saw my wife Michelle and her 4 friends walking toward me. Michelle waved happily and ran over to give me a hug and kiss. I said hello to all her friends as well. Then Michelle started patting her pockets, and her expression changed. She looked at me and said she lost her wallet and keys. So Michelle and I, along with one friend who wanted to help, went back up to the terminal to look around. We asked an airport worker to have the plane checked for the wallet and keys. Long story short, we spent a lot of time searching everywhere and found nothing. She swore she had both items after getting off the plane. Eventually, we had to give up and go home. The worker told us they would call if anything turned up. Michelle was upset the whole way home. When we got home, Michelle went to our room, and I heard her drop her big bag onto the bed from downstairs. I was in the kitchen making a quick snack when I heard her scream from upstairs. It hit me like a punch to the chest. I ran to our room and saw her pointing at the bathroom door. I looked and then saw both closet doors across the room wide open, and all our things thrown everywhere, boxes ripped open, papers all over the floor. She stuttered out words, "There is someone in the bathroom tonight." My heart almost stopped, but I had to step up and handle it. I tried the bathroom doorknob, but it was locked. Michelle ran out of the room, which I later learned was to call the cops. I started ramming the weak bathroom door with my shoulder, and after 5 hard hits, it finally broke open. The bathroom was empty, and the window was pushed wide open just enough for someone to climb through. I stayed with Michelle until the cops arrived, and listening to her tell them what she saw gave me chills. She had tossed her bag onto the bed, not noticing the closet yet, and suddenly felt something brush past her. When she turned, she saw a very tall man walking into the bathroom, staring at her with wide blank eyes. She only managed to scream once he locked himself inside. It is safe to say he found her keys and wallet and used the chance to break into the house. We changed the locks the next day and never saw the man again. A little about me. I'm 22 now, and this happened when I was 10, and even back then I had a cell phone only because my parents traveled for work, while I stayed with my grandparents when they were on the road. And at the time, my dad was working in Austin while my mom was home with me. So during my school break, we decided to fly down to see him, and my mom, being a smoker, didn't want me sitting in that glass cigar room full of smoke. So she left our gate with me and sent me to the bookstore nearby while she stayed close enough to see me. And before we split, she told me to text her saying I really want this book if I felt anything weird from anyone. And since I loved reading, I figured I'd look around until she finished her cigarette. And that's when, after a few minutes, I noticed a man walk in wearing a gray suit and black shoes, and his shoes followed me from the thriller section to another shelf, and then to the rack in the middle. And every time I moved, he moved too, until my fear kicked in for real. and I tested him by going to the little kid section, and he followed again, and that's when I grabbed a random book and texted my mom. And only seconds later, I smelled her perfume and heard her voice, and we paid and left. And once I told her what happened, she said she'd seen him follow me twice and already felt sick about it. And after the bathroom, we went back to our gate and saw the same man sitting 2 seats from our bags, so my mom grabbed our things and sat by the plane entrance until we boarded. And even then, the man was only a couple rows away. And during our layover, my mom told me later that he got off right behind us and followed us to our next gate. And she said she was ready to fight him, but wouldn't because I was with her, and after checking the gate info, she dragged me into the smoking area where she smoked as fast as I had ever seen because the man followed us there too, and then to the gift shop. And finally, after she'd had enough, she told the gate lady everything, and security came down, and right after she pointed at him, the man took off running and security chased him. And a couple minutes later, they let us board our plane to Austin without the creepy bookstore guy. A little backstory is that my parents are divorced and I live mostly in Australia, but travel to the UK to see my dad and family whenever I can. And during this visit, I was 13 and flying alone because of schedules. And the airport had a program for minors where they give you a tag and escorts, help with boarding, and everything started normal, and the first few hours of the flight were quiet except for the weird feeling that someone was watching me, even though I couldn't tell who, and I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just nerves from flying alone, until I got up to use the bathroom and noticed a man 4 rows back staring at me without trying to hide it. And when I walked by, he made a small gesture like he wanted me to come over, but I remembered what my mom told me about not talking to adults when I'm traveling alone, so I ignored him and went to the bathroom and walked back without looking at him again. But that feeling of being watched stayed with me the rest of the flight until the sleeping hours when the lights were dim and everything was quiet. And I was tired but awake watching a movie when suddenly he came over and put his hand on my shoulder and said something I couldn't hear because of my headphones, so I took them off, and he crouched down and quietly asked me to come to the back of the plane with him. And when I asked if I did something wrong, he said no, and then pulled out a wallet with cash and said he'd give me money if I just talked to him in the back. For a moment, and I was so tired that I didn't even feel scared at first, just confused, until the woman behind me lifted her eye mask and leaned forward and told him she isn't interested. Go back to your seat right now, or I'll call the flight attendant. And I have never seen someone move so fast as he hurried back to his seat and turned away, and the woman told me to wake her if he came back and to use the center bathroom if I needed to later. And she watched him the rest of the flight and asked me questions about my family and where I was going. And when she heard my extended family was waiting for me, her face relaxed, and she said she'd walk out with me. And when we landed, she stayed with me until I saw my father, and I thanked her and left. But even now, I still feel dread wondering what that man wanted. And I'm grateful she stepped in, because I never want to know what his intentions were. This is a story about something that happened to me and my grandma when I was 6 or 7, around 2001 or 2002. And for context, I'm a girl, and back then I lived in a small but important city that always had an airport, and my aunt was flying in. And since she had lived in another town for a long time, we were excited to welcome her. So we went to the place where people come out after getting their luggage, with the sliding glass doors where you can see everything inside. And I remember talking nonstop until my grandma suddenly grabbed my hand tight and gave me a look that told me to be quiet. And at first, I thought I said something wrong, but soon I noticed she was trying to listen to the people next to us, who seemed to be arguing loudly. And since my grandma was always nosy, she leaned in without moving, and I looked over and saw an old man and a very pregnant woman talking about something that didn't interest 7-year-old me, so I stopped paying attention until I heard the old man shout something like, "There he is, I'm going to get him," again and again. And then a man came through the sliding doors, and suddenly people started screaming everywhere, and my grandma threw me to the floor and covered me with her body, and I heard loud popping sounds like fireworks and people screaming. And there was a strange hot smell, and the floor felt sticky close to my face, and I tried to push her off because it was hot, and I felt trapped. And when I lifted my head for a second, I saw lots of red on the ground, inches from me, and many people lying flat with their hands over their heads. And everything smelled awful and heavy. And that's when my grandma pushed my head down hard and whispered, "Stop," and "Play Dead Now" in the most serious tone I had ever heard. And for the first time, I realized something really bad was happening, and I stayed still, trying not to cry. And after a while, she got off me in half, carried me behind a big pillar where a police officer told me everything was okay, even though I could see people shaking and crying. And we sat there listening to police shouting, and the old man screaming and crying, until suddenly it got really quiet. And later, I was taken to a room to talk to officers, and one covered my eyes as we walked, and I fought his hand off for a second and saw the pregnant woman lying on her back, which burned into my mind forever. And years later, my grandma finally told me the full truth. She said the old man was her father, and she was young and pregnant by a guy I'll call Dick, who had abandoned her and disappeared, and he came back because she reached out and wanted him involved again. But when her father found out, he got furious and wanted revenge, and my grandma heard him talking about how Dick ruined her life and how he wouldn't let anyone treat her that way, and he kept saying she loved the guy and convinced him not to do anything, but he had a gun. And when Dick walked out with his luggage, the father pulled it out and started shooting, and that's when my grandma threw me to the ground. But the father wasn't calm or experienced, so he shot wildly and hit other people. And while this was happening, the pregnant woman kept screaming that she loved her baby's father. And when her dad finally aimed properly, she jumped in front of Dick, and both she and the baby died instantly. And my grandma said it all happened fast, and police ran in right after the shot and tried to take the gun, but the old man was in shock, staring at what he had just done. And after a while, he relaxed enough for them to grab the gun and arrest him. And she said the airport was small and not used to crime, so it took them longer than normal to get there. And she said the whole thing lasted maybe 20 minutes, but to me, it felt like forever. And when she told me recently how close we were standing, she said that the red I saw near my face was someone who had been hit, and I was putting myself in danger trying to push her off. And I'm forever grateful she protected me so well, and that I didn't fully understand what was going on until then. Recently, I came over from Serbia at age 13 with my mother. My older brother, who was 15 years older than me, had been living in America for a few years and had sent for us, though at the time I didn't realize my mom wouldn't be staying. We landed in New York City, and the plan was my brother would pick us up. But his wife went into labor shortly before we landed, so he couldn't leave. And he asked a coworker who drove cabs to pick us up and take us to New Jersey, where he and my sister-in-law lived. We waited in customs forever looking for him, and back then cell phones weren't common, so even if they were, my mom and I didn't have one. Suddenly we heard our names called, and I saw a tall man introduce himself in perfect Serbian, saying he was a friend of my brother and telling us about the baby, saying he would drive us 2 hours to my brother's home. My mom relaxed, and they started chatting happily about the baby and my brother, but I immediately felt off. There was something about this man that made my skin crawl, and no matter my brother's friendship, I didn't trust him. We drove for an hour and a half when he announced we were going to have breakfast, and we were starving. We pulled up to a dark, dirty house, and I got nervous, but he cheerfully said his wife was cooking for us. My mom shushed me when I whispered I felt something was wrong and said we should be grateful. As we were led inside, the house smelled damp and strange, and my mom finally got nervous too. Suddenly, he grabbed her wrist and told her he needed a wife to take care of him in his house. And when he heard my brother say she'd be coming, he decided he had found one. I was a small kid and tried to push him off my mom, but he hit me so hard I saw stars. We were terrified, trapped in a house where we couldn't speak English, didn't know the emergency number, and only knew my brother's home number. He told my mom to clean and cook, and he locked me in the basement, which I later realized was a laundry room. I banged, cried, and screamed, but everything sounded muffled from so far down, and we were kept there for a week. He would only let us out at 4 when he came home, and the basement was freezing, with only a bathroom and the laundry room. One morning I noticed a small window I could climb on boxes to reach, and my mom insisted I squeeze through it. I didn't want to leave her, but I also didn't want to live like that. I ran outside, scrawny and shoeless in November, and several neighbors tried to approach me, but I was terrified and led them toward my mom. The police arrived. A kind officer tried to get me in his car, and I saw the man driving up in his taxi. When he saw the police, he took off. I ran back to the house to get my mom, and the officers rescued her. It took hours to find someone who spoke our language so we could tell what happened. A warrant was issued for him. My brother was contacted, and he frantically called home in Serbia. He gave the cops all the information on his supposed friend so they could find him, but he was never caught. Back then, before 9/11, it was easier for someone to disappear. The experience left me distrustful of strangers for a long time. My mom grew homesick and returned to Serbia, and I stayed to finish school, later joining the military as a cop because of the officer who helped me all those years ago. I still think about the man who held us prisoner, and honestly, I wouldn't mind meeting him now, but I doubt he'd want to meet me. Recently, I came over from Serbia at age 13 with my mother. My older brother, who was 15 years older than me, had been living in America for a few years and had sent for us. Though at the time I didn't realize my mom wouldn't be staying. We landed in New York City, and the plan was my brother would pick us up. But his wife went into labor shortly before we landed, so he couldn't leave. And he asked a coworker who drove cabs to pick us up and take us to New Jersey, where he and my sister-in-law lived. We waited in customs forever looking for him, and back then cell phones weren't common, so even if they were, my mom and I didn't have one. Suddenly, we heard our names called, and I saw a tall man introduce himself in perfect Serbian, saying he was a friend of my brother and telling us about the baby, saying he would drive us 2 hours to my brother's home. My mom relaxed and they started chatting happily about the baby and my brother, but I immediately felt off. There was something about this man that made my skin crawl, and no matter my brother's friendship, I didn't trust him. We drove for an hour and a half when he announced we were going to have breakfast, and we were starving. We pulled up to a dark, dirty house, and I got nervous, but he cheerfully said his wife was cooking for us. My mom shushed me when I whispered I felt something was wrong and said we should be grateful. As we were led inside, the house smelled damp and strange, and my mom finally got nervous too. Suddenly, he grabbed her wrist and told her he needed a wife to take care of him in his house. And when he heard my brother say she'd be coming, he decided he had found one. I was a small kid and tried to push him off my mom, but he hit me so hard I saw stars. We were terrified, trapped in a house where we couldn't speak English, didn't know the emergency number, and only knew my brother's home number. He told my mom to clean and cook, and he locked me in the basement, which I later realized was a laundry room. I banged, cried, and screamed, but everything sounded muffled from so far down, and we were kept there for a week. He would only let us out at 4 when he came home, and the basement was freezing, with only a bathroom and the laundry room. One morning, I noticed a small window I could climb on boxes to reach, and my mom insisted I squeeze through it. I didn't want to leave her, but I also didn't want to live like that. I ran outside, scrawny and shoeless in November, and several neighbors tried to approach me, but I was terrified and led them toward my mom. The police arrived. A kind officer tried to get me in his car, and I saw the man driving up in his taxi. When he saw the police, he took off. I ran back to the house to get my mom, and the officers rescued her. It took hours to find someone who spoke our language so we could tell what happened. A warrant was issued for him. My brother was contacted, and he frantically called home in Serbia. He gave the cops all the information on his supposed friend so they could find him, but he was never caught. Back then, before 9/11, it was easier for someone to disappear. The experience left me distrustful of strangers for a long time. My mom grew homesick and returned to Serbia, and I stayed to finish school, later joining the military as a cop because of the officer who helped me all those years ago. I still think about the man who held us prisoner, and honestly, I wouldn't mind meeting him now. but I doubt he'd want to meet me.